Hello guys, this is part 116 of ASP.NET video series. In this video, we will discuss about adding custom events to ASP.NET Composite Custom Control that we have been working with from parts 112 to 115. If you have not watched these videos, I strongly recommend to watch them first before proceeding with this video. We have also discussed about adding custom events to user controls in part 106 to 108. You can watch these videos from the ASP.NET video tutorial before proceeding with this video. Adding custom events, custom events to composite custom control is similar to adding events to user controls. If you know how to add custom events to user controls, then you already know how to do that for composite custom controls as well. There are 5 simple steps. There are 5 simple steps to actually add date selected event to the composite custom calendar control that we have been working with. So if you look at this composite, if you look at this composite custom calendar, control, as soon as I select a date, from this control, let's say for example I select September 10, 2024. This control should raise this date selected event. And obviously the first step to do that is to create a class date selected event args class that is going to contain event data, that is going to contain event data. Now I have this class here. Now I have this class here. Now I have this class here, so let me copy this. And then let's go back to the custom control project. So this is the custom control project. Now I'm going to create this class. I'm going to create this class. Outside of this custom calendar class, okay, because this is a class itself, by itself, and this is going to contain event data, okay. Now this may not be very clear the purpose of this class at this moment, but don't worry, when we actually consume this event, that is when we will understand better the purpose of this class. But look at the contents of this class. This is a very simple class. All we have is a private variable. is a private variable, a constructor, and a property. And a property. This is a private variable of type datetime. This is a private variable of type datetime. Okay, selected date underscore selected date. And to initialize this private variable, we have a constructor. Constructor here, date selected event args. This is the constructor. Into this constructor, we are passing in a parameter of type datetime, again selected date. So we are using this parameter to initialize this private field underscore selected date, and then we have a public property. Here, the important thing to notice here is that it has only a get accessor, meaning this is a read-only property. The user of this class can only read the value of this variable underscore selected date. Using this property, they can't set the value. Okay, that is our intention behind having only the get accessor. So if they want to initialize this property, they can do that only using the constructor of the class. So a private field, a constructor to initialize that field, and a public property, which returns the value of that private field. A very simple class. And another important point to keep in mind, this class inherits this class inherits from the event args class. Okay, so that is the first step. Later we will see how we actually use this class. This is very useful class which is going to contain event data for our date selected event. Okay, so that is the first step. So what is the second step? Create. So what is the second step? Create selected event handler delegate. So let's go ahead and create a delegate. Anytime we are talking about events and delegate, go hand in hand, because events are variable of type delegate. So obviously if you have to create an event, there should be an associated delegate. So let's go ahead and create delegate first, and let's call this delegate as date selected event handler delegate. And delegate is also a type and it can exist by its own. So the delegate need not be present inside another class. So public delegate. So public delegate and if you remember when we were discussing about events and delegates in parts 106 to 108, we have spoken about what delegates are, what events are in a very great detail. So if you are new to events and delegate, I strongly recommend to watch these videos from the ASP.NET video tutorial first. Alright, let's go ahead and create a delegate. A delegate will have signature that is similar to a function, with a delegate keyword. Now, if you remember, the signature of a function will have return type. Here the function, let's say it is not going to return anything, so it is going to have void. So it is going to have void return type, and then we are going to call our delegate as date selected event handler. Date selected event handler. Date selected event handler delegate. So date selected event handler, and this is going to have two parameters, object senders, and then look at this. Now I'm going to make use of this class date selected args. Okay, so this class is useful for containing the event data. So I'm going to use that class. So date selected event args e. So date selected events args e. Okay, it is very simple. It has a void return type. It is very simple. It has a void return type, and it takes two parameters. One is of type object, and other one is of type date selected event args. The class that we have just created in step 1, and with the delegate keyword in front of it. Okay, and with the delegate keyword in front of it. Okay, so that is our second step. What is the third step? What is this third step? Create delegate date selected event. Create date selected event. Now what is an event? An event is nothing but a variable of type delegate. Now if I have to create a variable of type, let's say integer, variable of type, let's say integer, I, let's say integer, then how do I do that? I simply say int I. For example, along the same line, if I have to create an event, then if I have to create a variable of type, there is a delegate. I simply say date selected event handler. I simply say date selected event handler, and then specify variable. Okay, so what is a delegate? What is event? An event is nothing but a variable of type delegate. So let's go ahead and create an event. So let's go ahead and create an event. Now remember, the event has to be raised by the custom calendar class. So I am going to create event inside the class, custom calendar class. So expand this. I have already expanded it, this custom calendar class, and then let's go ahead and create the event. So an event is a variable of type delegate. So we have created date selected event handler. So we have created date selected event handler delegate. So my date selected event is going to be my date selected event is going to be a variable of type this delegate, and then if I want that to be an event, all I do is I put an accessor modifier public, and then use the event keyword. So now date selected is the event that is going to be raised by this custom calendar, that is going to be raised by this custom calendar class. So that is our third step. Okay, so what is our fourth step? What is our fourth step? Create a protected virtual method to raise the event. Again, we have discussed about this again we have discussed about the significance of using this protected virtual method. Again, we have discussed about the significance of using this protected virtual method to actually raise an event rather than raising that directly. Again, we have discussed about that in part 106 to 108. I strongly recommend to watch those videos. Okay, so let's create this protected virtual method, and just to save some time in typing, I have this method already typed. So let me copy that. And let's go back to the project custom control. Go back to the project custom controls, and within the custom calendar class, I am going to create this protected virtual method. And look at this. This is very simple. All this method does is it takes in date selected event tags. It takes in date selected events hours. A parameter of type date selected event hours. And what we are doing with that object, and look at that, we are checking. So first of all, this is a protected virtual. Method with void return type, and I am calling this is on date selection, and I am calling this is an on date selection. Okay, so whenever somebody selects a date, that is when I call this method to actually raise date selected event. Okay, and date selected event args object, and date selected events arg object is passed as an parameter. And look at this, this here, this is very important. We are actually checking, we are actually checking if date selected is not equal to null. What is date selected? That is the event. So if the event is not null, then go ahead and raise the event. That is what we are doing here. Now we again discuss the significance of checking null before actually raising the event. Actually raising the event in part in part 106 to 108. Okay, so I am not going to repeat that here. So it is very important that we check for null. It is very important that we check for null before we actually raise the event. And look at this. What is this event? And look at this. What is this event? This is nothing but a date selected. What is this? This is variable of type. What is this? This is a variable of type date selected event handler. And if you look at the date selected event handler, and if you look at the date selected event handler, it has two parameter. It has two parameter. So obviously when you are about to raise that event, you have to pass the argument for two. You have to pass the argument for two parameter. Okay, so if you look at the opening braces, if you look at the opening braces, look at it expects sender. It expects sender, the object who is raising the event. So who is raising this event? I am using this keyword. I am using this keyword, meaning an instance of this custom calendar will actually raise an event. If you remember in the demo project, if you remember in the demo project, if you remember in the demo project, we are actually using the custom calendar. We are actually using the custom calendar control. Look at this. If I flip that to the source, if I flip to the source, if I flip to the source, custom calendar 1, that is an instance of custom calendar object. I'm in class. Okay. So here when we said when we are raising the event here, we said this for the source parameter here, I mean the sender parameter, meaning an instance of this class, custom calendar class. Instance of this class, custom calendar class, is going to raise this date selected event. And what is this E? That is going to contain our event data, date selected, event hours, date selected, event data, date selected, event arguments, object. So what is coming into this? So what is coming into this method that is being passed to this that is being passed, to this event. Okay, in our next step we will actually see how to use this method to raise this event to raise this event. Okay, so that is our next step. Finally raise the so that is the our next step. Finally raise the finally raise the event when the date selection in the calendar changes. When the date selection in the calendar changes. Now, when does the date in the calendar changes? Whenever somebody select a somebody whenever somebody selects a date. Now remember, whenever we select a date, whenever we select a date, this this is the ASP.NET calendar. But this all put put together is our custom calendar. So whenever the selection changed event in the calendar in the ASP.NET calendar is raised, that is when we want to raise date selected event. For this composite custom control. Okay, so let's go back to custom controls and let's look at the code where we have calendar underscore selection change. Here we have calendar underscore selection change event. So we have here calendar underscore selection changed event. So when will this event be raised? Whenever the selection in the calendar changes. Okay, so at that point of time we want to raise date selected event as well. And look at this. To raise a date selected event, we can make use of this. And look at this. To raise date selected event, we can make use of this virtual method. That we have just written on date selection. So I'm going to call this method there. So I'm going to call this method there. So I'm going to call this method here. Okay, so here, but look at that. If I have to raise the event using onDate selection method, then I have to pass an object of type date selected event args. Okay, so first I need to create an instance of that class. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and do that. Date selected. Events args. E. Date selected. Events args. E. Let's say E, or let's call this event data, or let's call it event data. Let's call it event data. So I have that event data there, and look at the constructor of the class. This is expecting date time. This is expecting date time object to be passed in. So what type of what date time do we pass in here? Look at this. Whenever user select a date whenever user select a date using that calendar, we have the selected date property. We have the selected date property, which gives the selected date. So I'm going to pass same selected date. Okay. So I'm going to pass the same selected date. Okay. So we have this event data. Now event data object, all that is left out is to pass that event data object to on date selection method. We are done. So this method is going to raise that event for us. Look at this. The whole purpose of this date selected event hours, the whole purpose of this date selected event hours class is that, so whenever we are about to raise the event, we need to pass to this, we need to pass this, we need to pass this to this, we need to pass to this on date selection method the event data. And how do we get the event data? From the calendar. How do we get the event data? From the calendar object. In the calendar, whenever the end user select a date, that will be retrieved using using selected date property of the calendar, ASP.NET calendar, which is in turn is used to create an instance of this date selected. Date selected of the date selected event hours object, and then we are passing that object, and then we are passing that object to this into this method. And if you look at this method on date selection, and if you look at this method on date selection, what is that doing? That is actually using that object. That is using actually that object to raise the event. That is using that object to raise the event. And whoever is going to consume this event, and whoever is going to consume this and whoever is going to consume this event, the event handler method. The handler method is going to receive this date selected event args. Date selected events args object, and then we can find out what is the value that is selected by the user very easily. Okay, so that's it. We are pretty much done. So let's go ahead and build this solution. Build this solution. So using these 5 simple steps, using these 5 simple steps, we have actually created this custom event date selected. We actually created this custom event date selected. Now let's go ahead see how to actually consume this event, and that is pretty straightforward. Okay, so we have built the projects. So we have built the project, and on the status bar you can see build succeeded. Now let's flip to ASP.NET Web Application Project. Now let me first get rid of now first let me get rid of a version that I have already here, a version that I have already here. And then I am going to get rid of this button declaration as well. Button declaration as well. And then let's go back to code behind file. And file, get rid of this button click event from there. Get rid of this button click event from there. Okay. So on web form and from the toolbox, so on web form from the toolbox, let's also remove the custom calendar control. So go to the toolbox and then remove the custom calendar. Remove the custom calendar. Okay, and let's quickly check in the bin folder. And let's quickly check in the bin folder. And let's quickly check in the bin folder of the ASP.NET Web Application project. So bin we should have custom control DLL there. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Close that. Close that. Let's close that and let's check in the references. Remove that. Let's check in the references. Remove that. All right. So let's go ahead and add the assembly once again. Let's go ahead and add the assembly once again. Choose item. Choose toolbox items. Browse. And we know that the project is in C drive. Navigate to custom control project means navigate to user, Dell, desktop, part 112, custom controls, object, debug. From the debug folder, select the assembly, click OK. That should add the custom calendar. That should add the custom calendar. All is left out is to drag and drop that onto the designer surface, which should now put an instance of the custom calendar control on this web form. Okay. Now put an instance of the custom calendar control on this web form. Okay, so we have that registered ID. We have that registered ID. Registered ID is custom calendar 1. Let's flip to designer mode. And we can associate an image with that. Using image button, image URL. So images /calendar.jpg. That should pick up the image from that folder which we have. And the most important thing, look at this. When I go to the properties and then click on this event, When I click on this event icon, you should now see date selected. You should now see date selected event. Look at that, we have the date selected event. Okay, now when I double click in the text box here, look at that, on that event I have the event handler method automatically generated for us, custom calendar one. So if I double click here, so I have the event handler method automatically generated for us, custom calendar one underscore custom calendar one underscore date selected. And look at this, the date selected event args. And look at this, date selected event args object that is now passed in to this event handler, to this event handler method. Now I can use this object. Now I can use this object to find out what is the date that the user has selected. So that is the most, so that is the most, significance of having this, of having this date selected event argument class. Of having this date selected events args. Date selected event args argument class. Okay, so now I simply can say response. So I can simply say response dot write dot write dot write e dot selected date. Remember this class selected date class contains a get property. Remember this class contain a get property. Selected date contain a get property. I mean a selected date property. We are using that property to actually retrieve the date. That is the whole point in creating this property. And you remember this constructor is, this constructor is used to initialize this private field. When we are actually creating an instance of that object in the custom control, where we did use that constructor, here. That we use constructor Here, the constructor takes in date time. All right, takes the constructor takes date time, date time. All right. So I'm going to use the selected date. So I'm going to use the selected date, and I'm going to convert that to short date string. Convert that to short to short date string. To short date string. So that is the selected date. Okay. So that is the selected date. Okay. So when will this method? So when will this method be called? This method will be called whenever date selected event is raised. This method will be called whenever date selected event is raised. And look at this, and look at this, and look at this. Let's go back to the designer. So when I double click this, what actually happens behind the scenes within the source? What happened in the behind the scenes within the source? Within the source, look at that. On date selected, when this event is fired, this event handler method will be this event handler will be method will be called, just like when you have a button, on click button 1_click event handler method will be called. Okay, similar to that, whenever date selected event is raised, date selected event is raised, this event handler method, whenever the date selected event is raised, this event handler method will be called. So let's go ahead and run this. So let's go ahead and run this. And as soon as I click, as soon as I select the date, as soon as I select the date from the calendar, the event will be raised. The event handler method will handle that, and it should print out the selected date. So I am selecting 17th. Look at that. As soon as I select the date, it is going to print that for me. Okay, so whenever this selection changes, the event gets raised, and that event is actually consumed by consumed by this event handler method. Consumed by this event handler method. this event handler method, that you can see custom calendar 1 underscore date selected. Underscore date selected, and within that event handler and within that event handler method, we are using the object date selected events args. We are using the object date selected event args object that contains the event data, and we are printing that on the web form by converting it to short date string. So 5 simple steps. So 5 simple steps to create custom event. It is very much similar to how we do it for user control. So if you know that, then it is pretty much straightforward. It is pretty much straightforward in our. It is pretty much straightforward. In our next video, we will actually discuss about assigning an image. We will actually discuss about assigning an image. Look at this. At the moment, if you look at the custom calendar control, it does not have an image associated with it in the toolbox. If you look at that, it has a very generic image there. Instead of that, we can actually associate our own image. We will discuss about how to do that in our next video session. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.